a couple of hours. So I'm very, very thankful.
Well, so I record the Zoom sessions. So you'll get to see the Zoom session. And then also because really what this is, a lot of it is video, prepared video, because it's so much clearer, especially when we get to, like sewing everything together. It's so much clearer to have a prepared video. So what I will do, because we're recording right now, what I will do then is once we finish the Zoom lesson, then I will download it to YouTube. And then, so you're going to get the link from the Zoom session. You're also going to get the links from the videos contained within separately, so that you can actually, you don't have to sort through the entire Zoom lesson if you don't want to access the video. So that's kind of how I run this. And so when first off, let me just say welcome. You're making the Guipure Lace jacket, and this was kind of a, oh yes, I have the jacket here still. Actually, I have to deliver it. So you know who you are, got to deliver it. So Guipure Lace is, especially the Guipure Lace that I'm using here, is, what I like about this is that it has a lot of texture, but the drawback to it is that it's a little bit spongy and not very stable. And so I decided I wanted to teach how to do this, because the object, when we get done, and you'll see this in the video, the object is you want something that really appears as seamless as possible. And so there's there's the kind of the setup, the marking, there's the way I stitch it, which is a little different than some of my colleagues would use. And then for this particular one, I'm showing you the French bias binding. And the French bias binding is one of those techniques that isn't necessarily just for lace. You can use it in other applications, but I like this particular binding because it turns out really nicely, and it gives the edge of the garment a real substantial edge. So we have the pattern. So when I run the videos, what I would say, because when I'm going to give full screen and then I won't be able to see all of you. So if you have a question, just kind of call it out, because I can stop the video and run it back if I need to answer the question. And so, I mean, that's really the point of all of this, is that any question you have, you please do ask it, because you may have that question, other people may have that question. So just, stop me at any time in the videos, so that this is as clear as it possibly can be. Okay. So do we have any thoughts, comments, anything before we actually get going? Crickets.
No, I'm just really excited, because I'm going to admit, this is a fabric I have been afraid to work with. So I'm really happy you did this class.
Well, that's that. And did you send me the photo of which one that you did, Lisa?
I did. I'm going to go get it in a minute. Yeah, it's fun.
Because some Guipure is embroidered on a net. So there's going to be one step that you will not have to do. The Guipure that I chose primarily because some of the Guipures, and you'll see this in the video when we get to it, some of them, because see, they're all embroidered on what's called a Shifley machine. Mm-hmm. And so for those who are not familiar with a Shifley machine, it's kind of fascinating. Imagine an embroidery frame that is 40 feet long by 20 feet high. Wow. No, seriously. And then, it's on a machine, and there are, I want to say 1,200 needles lined up, threaded. And so this embroidery frame moves along the XY axis, kind of like any, an embroidery machine, if you have one of those, works. The idea is the same. The Shifley machines are installed in buildings whose foundations are on bedrock. And this is important because when you have a big frame with fabric loaded into it that's 40 feet long and 20 feet high, it can shake a building to pieces. Literally. I know that sounds crazy, but it can. And so there are different kinds of Shifley embroidery. There's Shifley embroidery on fabrics, there's Shifley embroidery on net, and then there are what are called chemical laces, which is what the Guipure that I'm using is, where they embroider it on a ground, kind of like a non-woven pellon. And we know the water soluble versions, but they have versions that dissolve in chemicals, so that once the embroidery is on the stabilizer, then they dissolve the stabilizer. They dissolve the stabilizer, and then just the embroidery stitches are there. And that's spelled Shifley, Schifffli. It's a German. And as far as asking questions, shout the question out. You don't have to put it in the chat because we're all here. We're all friends here. So without any further ado.
So Kenneth, I will say that the one I'm using for this class is already on a net.
Yeah.
But now Alice knows me and sent me samples, and so now I also have another piece that does not have a ground, because you have introduced me to the world of Mendel Goldberg fabrics, and my pocketbook will never be the same.
Yes, I don't know how many of you have shopped with Alice and Mendel Goldberg, but she's quite a gal. Her
figured out I like roses, and I am now doomed.
Yeah, well, yes. And if you get to New York, it's worth a trip to the Lower East Side to see the fabrics she has. I don't know where she gets them, but she has some pretty spectacular fabrics. Now, you're not going to go there for any bargains, but what you get, you're going to pay. I mean, you're going to pay for what you get, because she has some quite wonderful things. I'm going to confess that I didn't buy the lace that I'm using for this particular example with Alice. And so please don't tell her, because she might get mad at me if she finds out.
We'll be quiet.
Yeah, she so wants to give me fabric. And as a contributing editor for Threads magazine, they're very specific that there are certain things we may not, if they give you a spool of thread or something, that's one thing. But, when you get into Alice prices, we have to declare it. And it's just, for me, in order to kind of remain impartial to the sewing community, I always have to just politely say thank you. But
yeah, I can see how she'd quickly get into some ethics issues.
Well, I wouldn't say that. It's just that I try to treat everybody the same. And so,
yeah.
so anyway, so let's get started, shall we?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Please
If
do.
we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Janet, good morning. Nice to see you.
Hi.
You're talking about laces. Hi. And I live in a fabric store desert, so I have to go almost strictly online to purchase this lace, and it's a little nerve-wracking. Is there anything I should be looking for as far as content? You're talking about some of it being on netting and some not. Is there something, I'm thinking, I guess, more content than anything that I should be looking for or avoiding?
Well, what I would say, fiber content is sort of up in the air, because most of this is rayon or polyester embroidery thread, which is, I don't think man-made fiber is a bad thing. Let's see, let me look at the chat. Yeah, let's see. Michelle at Treadle ordered you a wonderful navy. So, in the video, because I'm gonna show you the jacket and then these are the fabrics and such. Really, what I would aim you at is an all-over pattern. I mean, if you look at the one I'm working with, it's fairly dense. And I must confess that when I first started, because literally, I just started this class and started videoing it. And my first concern was, is this going to turn out okay or not? Because there's, I was trying to work with the repeat to a certain extent, but I understood that with the lace that I had and so forth, that I had to just make sure that the pattern read across horizontally, and where the joins are, and you'll get to see the jacket because we're going to start with that. Yeah. They all turned out okay. So I would go with something a little more dense rather than less dense.
Okay.
And if you look at the example that I use, because you'll get to see it laid out on the table, it will give you a little more sense of what you might look for. And so, you know, the two sources, Mendel Goldberg or Ann Steves at Gorgeous Fabrics, try Treadle Yard Goods in Minneapolis area. You know, there are places you can get it. You know, it may take a little doing to get it, but you can get it. Okay.
Well, I've looked at dozens and dozens and dozens, but since it's just online and a picture this big, don't have a lot of confidence. But the Michelle comment was a wonderful one. I remember her from the last class. She's lovely.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you. That's great. Appreciate it.
So Lori, yes.
Can I show you mine?
Sure. Let's see it. That's beautiful.
It's got a little for the waistline. I thought that would be nice.
That's fun. Yes.
Do you think it will work?
You know, I think it will. It might be a little bit sparse, but you know, the thing about this lace is what we're going to be doing if it's, and again, when you see the first video, you'll get to see a little sense more, is what I figured out to do on the Guipure that I have is we're going to be backing it with 2 layers of nylon tulle, like illusion veiling. And so having that backing on there is going to help you to piece everything together, because your seams are really going to kind of go wildly one way or another to create that illusion of seamlessness.
Now, what if the lace is fairly dense? Will 1 layer of tulle be enough possibly?
Well, if it doesn't have a net backing, you want 2 layers. And when we get to that point in the program, which is probably either late in today or maybe early next week, you'll see why. Okay. So let's start looking at some video. And then again, the first one is not very long. So, and again, ask questions as we go along. Don't be shy. Let's see, intro and materials. Okay, and so what I'm going to do now is collapse the gallery. So like I said, if you have any kind of questions, please call them out and I will answer them as we go along. This is the Guipure Lace jacket class. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Can everyone see?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yes.
Now, is that not beautiful?
Stunning.
Our example
Yes.
of the Guipure Lace jacket. So now let's take a close look at it here. First off, we're making applique seams. So even though this jacket has princess seams, they don't show up at all. Also, as you can see here, the bias binding is what's called a French binding. And I find that working with Guipure, where you don't have a defined selvage, this is quite an attractive finish. And it's not as difficult as it looks. So this is the front of the jacket. Now let me turn this girl around. I'll show you the reverse. So here is the reverse of this jacket. And again, you can see there are really no visible seams. It's all sewn with the applique seam. And one of the beauties of this particular Guipure lace is that it's quite busy, so the repeat isn't quite so obvious. And it creates a really quite lovely effect. So now let's look at this on the table, laid out flat. As you can see, what we're going to learn here is applique seams. Notice you don't see any join between the bodice and the sleeve, nor do you see any evidence of seams on the princess line except for the shaping. We're also going to learn French bias binding for the edges and the cuffs. And let's look on the inside here. So this is what the inside looks like. And you can see the seams, there's a little bit of a shadow of the seams here and there, but they're not readily apparent. And the only seam you really see is the underarm, which you really can't get away from. But that's another French bias binding. So this is what it looks like from the front. So now let me turn this over so I can show you what she looks like from the back. And this is what she looks like from the back. Notice you don't see any seams. That is the object here. When you're sewing really any kind of lace, the object is that you want it to look like the lace is woven to shape, as opposed to having any kind of seams. Now you will see a little seam at the underarm. Let me show you what it looks like from this side. We got to see it. So there. That's really the only place you're going to see a seam. But since your arm lowers to cover it, it will just disappear. So yeah, here we are. This is our jacket that we're going to be making in this class. So as you have guessed, we have quite a lot of work to do. So let's get busy. This is the pattern for the jacket as it comes out of the envelope. So as you can see, there are a total of 6 pieces. I will separate these pieces out and talk a little further about what you're seeing here. Here are the body pieces. As you can see, there are 4 of them. So we have the 2 front pieces and the 2 back pieces. These are graded from size 0 to 14. And the thing to remember is these have no seam allowances. All of the lines that you see are the actual stitching lines. If you were going to use this jacket for other projects, you would want to add seam allowances. But for this particular project, we want no seam allowances. So as you can see, there's the sizing. And you can see they're labeled. So yes, these are the body.
May I ask a question about the front?
Sure, yes.
The front princess seam.
This one here?
Yes.
Yes.
It, on me at least, it's way far from the bust apex. And did you have I mean, is it supposed to be? It's like 2 inches away from the bust apex. And so that the front piece is really wide for me.
Okay.
So, I mean, is this pattern made so that the princess seam goes over the bust or
No.
to the side?
As a rule, I don't like the princess seam go directly over the apex.
Okay.
The minimum distance outside the apex is 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch. And so, you know, if you want to move that seam in
Yeah,
to accommodate, you absolutely can.
right.
You know, but the general rule, what I found the general rule is if you have the princess seam directly over the apex, to my eye, it makes the princess seams look too close to the center. They're too.
All right. All right. But this is like 2 inches away, which,
Right.
I mean, then it kind of buckles underneath my arm because the curve is at the wrong part. I just have that's such a big change. Getting
Well,
the
you know,
seams to match.
Right. Well, you see, this is where we use the office hour to make sure that this
Alright.
pattern fits you. Because see,
Okay.
what you're going to do, you're going to see this. We're going to cut this out in muslin. We want, you know,
Right.
and so, you know, it sounds like you've adjusted patterns before. So if there are certain adjustments you do to your patterns,
Right.
you probably will be in firm ground to get this to a point where you, you know, we can look at it in a muslin and get it to fit you. So what I would recommend is, you know, make the bodice, you know, the bodice, and have the sleeve separate, you know, so we can get
Right.
the bodice fitted and then we can
Yes.
put the sleeve on.
Right, I did that.
Yes.
And that's what, I mean, I saw it when I was working on the pattern and I was adjusting the pattern, that front piece was so wide.
Yes. Well, you know, because see, a pattern is really just a starting point.
Yeah.
And so
I never had this problem though. So I
Right.
was thinking maybe because you're overlapping the lace that you wanted it further away from the bust.
well, like I said, I like it 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch away from the
Right.
bust. And so, you know, this pattern, like I said, you know, I'm starting with this pattern. And so if we have to correct that for you, absolutely, that's what we do.
All right.
Okay.
So Kenneth, when
Yep.
you say you want it 1/2 an inch or 3/4 of an inch away from the apex,
Yes.
are you saying 1/2 an inch and 3/4 of an inch away, that the seam is more towards the center front
No,
or
no,
more
no.
towards the back?
You want the princess seam closer to the side seam rather than to the center front.
Okay,
Because what I have found, it just sits better. And, you know, there are times, depending on the person I've cut it for, I actually end up easing this right along this area here so that it will actually shape around the bust. So, you know, again, this is a case by case basis. I'm dealing with, you know, a number of different figures in this particular class, but kind of to get us going, we have to start with a pattern. And so, you know, and that's why I offer the office hour, so that we can make sure this thing fits before you actually cut it out of lace.
Right. Can I make one more comment about that? I noticed that the shoulder seam length is really long. It's like
Yes.
6 inches.
And again,
Reason for that?
you can
Yes.
adjust that for you.
I know, but I never had to take like 2 inches off of the shoulder seam.
Okay, you know, see, I'm doing what
I thought
this
maybe
is
you
the
had a
pattern we're dealing
reason.
with. This is a pattern we're dealing with. And, you know, again, if you need to adjust, absolutely you adjust, but we have to start somewhere.
Sure, okay.
It's not like I can start by drafting every single person a pattern. And
Right.
so, yes. And again, that's why we will use the office hour to make sure that this fits your particular figure. The person that I fitted this onto, this fits her really well, but she has a different figure than you do. So we have to start somewhere.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Can I
I
ask a
hate
quick-
this.
What was that now? What was that? I missed that.
I hate adjusting patterns. It takes me so long.
Okay. Well, you know, but you see, because you know, I'm going a little bit astray here, but one time I was reading a review on the smart fitting book that I wrote for Threads, and someone was like, you know, I don't want to make 3 muslins. Like, well, then you don't want your clothes to fit. You know, making a muslin is really the you know, once you get a pattern, and I say to people in my classes, you don't need a lot of patterns, you just need a few of them that fit. And so, you know, the fitting, the adjusting, all of that, it's made a little easier if you have someone to help you do it in person. And, you know, if you are in the New York area, I'm just going to say, you know, if you can get to my studio, we can do the office hour in the studio. That's all that, you know, we don't necessarily have to do it on Zoom. But, you know, you have to adjust patterns.
Yes, I know, but since I don't have, you know, I'm doing it up for myself, it usually takes me 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You know,
but-
and I'm always like so enthusiastic, you know, and
Okay.
but it always takes me long. You know, I said, this is so easy.
Yeah.
It only has a few seams.
Yeah.
And-
So, but you know, we'll get you fitted up. Okay.
All right, sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So any other questions before we continue?
Can I ask a quick question?
Please do.
Just so I can cheat ahead maybe one muslin, I was wondering if you drafted for a specific cup size.
You know, I want to say it was a B cup, but I couldn't tell you for sure because I didn't
Okay.
ask.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So other questions? Okay. So back to the story. These are the 2 pieces for the sleeve. As you can see, we have a front and a back. So there will be a seam down the middle of the sleeve. This is going to make fitting a sleeve much easier as you have a seam in the front so you can add more bicep if you need to. So this one here, that is the front, that is the back.
May I ask a question about these two pieces?
Yes.
Okay, when I measured the arm's eye and I measured the sleeve, it looks like there's 0 ease. Is that
That's
correct?
That's
All right.
absolutely correct. Yes.
Because there's the dart, which
Right.
is the seam.
Yeah.
Okay.
And see, this is this particular sleeve is something I learned from my dear friend and colleague, Susan Calgi. And, you know, there are times if you need a lot of measurement in your bicep, and you want a high armhole, what you run into sometimes is that you end up with way too much cap ease. And so in order to get rid of cap ease, sometimes, and I've seen it in vintage garments, they put darts up in here, which I'm not a big fan of. I've seen it, I know it's correct, but I don't like it. But Susan runs a sleeve seam down the center of the sleeve. And so it solves a bunch of things. You don't end up with trying to get rid of a lot of cap ease, because on this, we're not easing the sleeve onto the bodice. It's all 1-to-1.
Right.
But if you're using this pattern for another purpose, you could actually give a little bit of ease here, you know, make that a little flatter just so you can get some cap ease. Okay, did that
Thank
answer
you.
the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Pieces that we'll be working with. Next, I will show you the customer's pattern and muslin. Here is the pattern after I have fitted the muslin. As you can see, I copied the pattern off on fresh paper. And so I have cut it so that the cut edges are actually the stitching lines. So here's the front side, side back. Then you have the center back panel. And as you can see here, I cut the center back on the fold. So I would have an entire pattern to work with. So this is the body. Next, I will show you the sleeves. And here we have the sleeves. So again, the cut edges are the stitching line. You can see I've marked the grain lines, I've marked the matching notches, and this would be the finished cuff length. This all relates back to the muslin. So you want to get the fit in the muslin. Then once the patterns are done, we can start looking at fabric. And this is the star of our show. This is called Guipure Lace. Now, Guipure Lace, for those who really are not familiar with it, it's an embroidered lace. This is all embroidered on a backing. The backing is then dissolved. So it creates a lace that is quite open. The drawback being is that it's a little bit spongy and you have all these holes. So to look at the lace, it's good to know how to tell the front from the back, because sometimes it isn't quite so obvious. So you can see here, all of the stitching is rather smooth. But when you turn it over on the reverse, you can see how the bobbin threads pull the stitches tight. So if you're not sure which side is the front and which side is the reverse looks a little rougher, as you can see. So this is the reverse, and this is the front. It has a lot more luster.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
So I got my lace from B&J,
Uh-huh.
and it smells like a little old lady's closet. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Oh gosh, you know, that I don't know. The first thing I would do is hit it with some Febreze.
Okay.
You know, that would be the first line of defense. If not that, then maybe washing it with some woolite.
Okay.
But
Can
yeah,
I like hand wash it or put it in the machine?
oh, I would hand wash it, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I'm surprised coming from B&J that is.
I am too. When I opened the package and it smelled like it had been mothballed, I was kind of shocked.
Oh.
I had a similar problem with the silk that I purchased for the bias binding.
Uh-huh.
2 days after I got it home, it literally smelled like it had been next to a chain smoker.
Oh dear.
And I washed and washed and washed, and it's, I'll try the Febreze thing. Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but I learned this is an old theater trick where it's like you get cheap vodka, not Stoli, not the good stuff, but the cheap vodka that, you know, the vodka that will rot through the bottle if you let it, and you spritz the garment from the back with the cheap vodka in a spritzer bottle. That's what they use in the theater, you know, because they can't clean those garments every day. So they use that. And there's something about, I guess, the chemicals or whatever that the vodka is made from that neutralizes smell. So that is another thing you could give a try.
It also had some spots on it on the fringe. There's some, like, I was really just, for what I paid for it, I was kind of disappointed.
You
but
see, I would have called them on it. You know, for what you pay at B&J, you know, because this lace that I have here, I mean, I bought this at, you know, this place on 38th Street, you know, and it was not a lot of money. But if I were going to be paying B&J prices, first off, I would want there to be no spots. And secondly, I wouldn't want it to smell. So, you know, I would complain if I were you, because they have a reputation to uphold.
okay, I'll call them then.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So other questions?
Yes, I have a question. With all these questions about smell, are we supposed to pre-treat this fabric?
You mean like pre-washing and so forth? I don't.
Okay,
The assumption being with a garment like this is that, you know, if you're going to clean it, you're going to spot clean it, or if it gets really, really dirty, you're going to send it to a very fancy dry cleaner.
okay,
But as a rule, lace garments, you know, if you really, really wanted to wash it, it would be like hand wash delicate, you know, like woolite, and lay it flat to dry. But I wouldn't do any of that pre-shrinking or anything at this stage.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Kenneth,
Yes.
you mentioned spot cleaning. Do you recommend a certain something?
Well, you know, the dry cleaning fluid that I have to check and see if it's still on the market. My bottle is so old. Carbuna, spelled Carbuna.
Okay.
It was the dry cleaning fluid that you know, I've used it for years. Now, another thing, maybe not so much on this, but on regular fabrics. One thing I learned years ago from the fancy dry cleaner that I did an article on for Threads is, you know, you're worried about leaving a spot on silk or something. And what they would do is they had the fluid in a spritzer bottle. And so after they cleaned the spot, they would take the spritzer bottle and spritz all around the diameter or all around the edges of the spot, so that the fluid, you know, it diffused, you know, so with the spray, you didn't have a hard line, it diffused. And then, so what that does is when it then dries, it's not going to leave a ring.
That's good to know. Thank you.
It's something also, if you drip water on silk, like say silk taffeta, same thing. You're going to get if you get that, you get your spritzer bottle out and spritz all around with the water so that there's no hard edge, and then you steam. And it's kind of magic, you know, you keep steaming and then it looks like, oh, you've really, really, really screwed the pooch. And then all of a sudden, bang, it's gone. So it's just something to know.
Good to know. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So let's continue. So this is our main fabric. However, we need a supporting fabric. The supporting player here is illusion veiling. This is what you would use for a wedding veil. Now, I should give you an up close look here. You want to see up close. Now you can see there is a definite lengthwise and crosswise grain on illusion veiling. So the little diamonds, they're longer running lengthwise grain. So the lengthwise grain is running this way, and the crosswise grain obviously is running that way. And how the other way you can tell is Crosswise grain has a lot more stretch. Lengthwise grain, not so much. We are going to exploit the lengthwise and crosswise grains of the illusion veiling in our construction. So aside from the illusion veiling and the guipure, those are the two materials you need. Obviously, you're going to need your scissors, you're going to need your threads and so forth, but we'll talk about threads in just a moment. One last material that you're going to need is silk organza. If you get yourself about a yard of this, that'll be plenty good. We're going to be using this to stay the edges of the jacket. It can be really any color because it's going to be hidden underneath the binding. So 1 yard of silk organza will do you just fine. So next we have a discussion of thread. The thread that I prefer to use for basting is by Gudermann. It's called Mara 30. This is the white version that I use on a lot of my basting. I'm actually going to be using red because the red will contrast better on the lace that we're going to be working with. So it's like a buttonhole thread. You could use really any basting thread that you have. You want something that's going to stay put in the lace until you don't need it anymore. So that's for the basting. And then for the actual sewing, I like to use a fine monofilament. These are 2 different monofilament threads. This one here is by Sulky. Where's the label? There we are. Sulky Invisible. You want something like this. You want it fine. And I'll talk about the machine settings. This is the same thing on a large cone. This will go in the needle when we're sewing. And then for the bobbin thread, I just like to use a standard Gudermann.
In the same color as the lace, or?
Yeah, you would want it in the same color because you're going to see it. You're not going to be removing it.
Okay.
Okay? You know, people gasp when I say polyester, but it is a good thread. So, and I'm going to talk, the reason I like to use the Gudermann in the bobbin rather than having the monofilament in both the needle and the bobbin is twofold. One, it's just, it causes trouble if you have the monofilament in the bobbin. It just makes it harder to sew. The other thing is having the Gudermann in the bobbin, you don't have to worry about feeling the itch of the cut ends of the monofilament because the monofilament will be on the outside. So this is for stability, also for comfort.
I mean, are we going to get in trouble if I really do not like the monofilament. I've never had success with it.
Well, you know, well, okay.
If I don't use it, is it okay?
No, you know, and see, you have that choice. Yeah, and see, this is where I would make a test before you actually sew your seams. You would make a test seam and see, do you, you know, if you color match your Gudermann to your lace, the sheen may be a little different, but if it doesn't show, it's all good. I like the monofilament because it just disappears. But, and so with the monofilament, and I'll talk about this more when we get there, but you know, there are 2 things a lot of people don't know about it. First off is you want to sew with a very fine needle. Because some people try to make the monofilament work with like a 10 or a 12 needle, and the needle is just too big. The other thing is you have to sew slowly because the friction generated with the take-up lever on the monofilament, because the take-up lever rubs up and down the thread 3 or 4 or 5 times before it actually gets to the needle. So if you're sewing monofilament quickly, what's going to happen is the friction of the take-up lever on the thread makes it brittle.
Yes.
And it will break. And
yes,
so when you're working with it, you want to sew it slowly.
All right. Do you have a recommendation for a brand? Because whatever I was using was like I haven't used it in years because of that.
Well, like I said, sulky.
Oh, silky, sorry.
Yeah. And so yeah, so that's, but it's one of those things, what I would say when we get there, which is a little bit down the road, by all means, make a test. See, this is something I tell my students at FIT. If they're doing something, I always say, make a test. Don't just start in on it. Make a test to see, okay, stitch length, thread tension. And also the other thing you would want to do with monofilament, people don't know this, is loosen the top tension. Because it's a combination of things that makes that thread knot up and break and cause trouble. So loosening the top tension, sewing very slowly, using the proper needle. These are things that are going to go far towards letting you have some success using that thread.
How small a needle should we get? Because I don't think I have anything lower than
Like it's like a number 8 or number 9.
Okay.
I mean, the smallest one you can get, because it's very fine thread. So the finest needle you can get is going to serve you very well. Okay. Okay, so let me just finish this up here. We will be working with when we sew this together. Okay, so questions up to this point?
Oh, does the color matter for the Mara 30, or is that just for basting?
The Mara 30 is for basting. You're going to remove all of that later, so it can be any old color that you want.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question for you, Kenneth.
Yes.
So my lace, pretty sure it's either cotton silk. It's very pretty. Would I want to still put a nylon tulle under that? Or if I had a cotton English netting, would I want to try to match the fiber content or not?
You're going to be using 2 layers.
Okay.
And so, because see, again, down the way a bit, but with Guipure, if it does not have a lace ground, it's quite unstable. It stretches. When you put it on, you end up like sticking your finger through a hole, that sort of thing. And so we're going to be interlining the pieces with the first layer. The lengthwise grain is going to be running vertically.
Gotcha.
And then after, because this is going to be a lot of hand sewing, so after you've tacked all of that Guipure to the first layer, you're going to put in a second layer. The lengthwise grain is going to run this way. And that does 2 things. One is it eliminates stretch this way because you're running the lengthwise grain this way. The other thing it's going to be doing is giving a layer of protection to all of that hand sewing that you just did, so that when you put the garment on, you're not going to get all of that hand stitching caught onto your clothing. So I like the nylon tulle because it's extremely sheer. And so, I mean, for the second layer, if you really wanted to use a cotton bobinette or something like that, I certainly wouldn't jump up and down and have a fit.
Okay.
But part of what I aim with was with the 2 layers of the bridal tulle is sheer.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So, yes.
Do you recommend a clear illusion bridal veiling, or is it okay to use color?
Well, actually, I'm going to cover that.
Oh, okay.
But it's good to ask the question when it comes. The first layer, I used a diamond white. That's the kind of the bridal term, because the lace is a gray. And so I used the diamond white, but on the second layer, I used like a flesh color. And you could actually put a different color behind if you wanted to have just a little bit of kind of undertone of a different color. So it doesn't have to be a specific color.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So other questions before we continue, because the next thing is going to be marking and cutting the lace, which is so exciting. Because see, marking and cutting the lace, of course, what you're going to do is you're going to get your pattern fitted, make sure everything is all right, because really there's no altering this. Once it's in the fabric, you're just kind of, you're there. So, so we're going to assume, by showing the next video, that we have gotten the pattern fitted and we love the pattern and we love the fit and we're ready to continue. Okay. Okay. So let us continue. So here we are, marking and cutting the lace. And again, please don't be shy about questions. Now, this is where we really need to study fabric itself before we cut. So this particular instance of fabric, you can see we have an interesting selvage. It's not easily removable on this side. And we have an interesting selvage, again, that's not easily removable on this side. Now, these would work beautifully for a skirt, but for a jacket, that's going to cause us some problems. So now I'm going to talk about the orientation. This here, as you can see, there is the lengthwise grain. And so you can see you have flowers facing up and you have flowers facing down. Guipure, as my friend and colleague Susan Kalji says, is somewhat of a stripe, and you can sort of see the stripe from the long view. So again, this is running lengthwise. Now I'm going to turn the fabric on the table crosswise, and we can have a look at it that way. So here is the fabric turned with the lengthwise grain running across the frame. Now, what I'm looking at here, you can see here, these flowers point up and these flowers point up. Now, a famous costume designer whose name I can't remember right offhand says flowers grow up. So I've decided in this particular guipure to have the flowers growing up. So again, here we have the selvage, and I may decide to use that for the cuffs on the sleeves, but right now I'm just really analyzing this fabric to try to decide how I'm going to place the pattern. Now, just a little cutting ahead, I decided not to use the selvage on the cuffs, but in this particular, when I was kind of looking at this, I was talking through my process because I was myself trying to figure out which way I wanted to lay this out. So in case you're wondering, that's why we didn't use that on the cuffs. One advantage to Guipure is that this lace is regular in its repeat. So that's going to make it a little easier. So after looking at the entire length of the piece, I've decided I have enough to run it with the lengthwise grain running parallel to the center back. So the cutting is going to be not terribly difficult, but what we want to do first, what I've done here, as you can see, is I've made sure that the pattern runs across the bottom. And I'm looking at these flowers here to make sure that the hem, the pattern reads across the hem. So how we do this, which you'll get to see in just a few moments, is we need to thread baste all around the pieces. Then we can remove the pieces and cut everything out, and you will get to see that a little further down the road. But like I said, I've made a decision. We're going to go with this particular layout.
Kevin,
We
you
are.
didn't,
No, my name is
Kenneth,
Kenneth.
sorry.
Yeah.
You didn't say anything about matching at the seam line so that when you matching the pattern at the seam line.
Okay, well,
you don't
really,
have to work.
okay, what happens here, and see what this is the beauty of this kind of a dense pattern is, as long as you have the hem reading horizontally across, you don't really have to worry about matching the pattern at the seam lines because you're going to be appliquing.
Unless the seam line falls like on like a dense piece of lace, you don't want that, right? Because then that's when you fold, when you overlap it, then it's too thick, right?
So,
Don't you have to watch for that when you?
well, the object here is, when you're cutting, because see, we're going to mark the stitching lines and then we're going to cut around the motifs. We don't want to cut through any motif.
Right.
Your seam really is going to kind of go here, there, and yonder. You're not going to have a seam necessarily unless you have just a dead piece of netting or whatever that you have to accommodate. And then, so then after you've sewn your seam, what you're going to do is trim out from below and trim out from above any excess. So the seam itself is going to be very curvilinear. So you don't have to worry so much about thickness.
Well, I mean, when you hand sewing, I mean, if you have a thick
Okay,
piece.
but we're not going to be hand sewing this. We're going to be
We're
sewing.
not?
Not the, we're going to be hand
That's why
basting.
I signed up for the course. I did it and I attached the lace to the background by hand.
Right.
Totally by hand, and you
Okay.
don't. That's why I'm here.
Okay, well, you see, now we're going to be attaching, again, all of this will be explained and getting a little ahead, but that's okay. See, we're cutting the lace out first,
Yes,
and then notice we're not cutting any of the tulle.
right.
That comes later. Then we
Right.
will hand attach all of the lace to the tulle.
Right.
And then when we actually sew all of these seams together, I mean, you could, if you really wanted to, sew this with a hand stitch. I would certainly not kick over that. For me, for my particular purposes, I show sewing the applique seams by machine, but you could absolutely sew it by hand if you wish.
Oh, with the zigzag stitch, you mean that you go?
I use a straight stitch.
Do you really?
Yeah, and you'll see it, I mean,
Right.
down the road, but yeah, I mean, if you really, really love hand stitching, you're going to be happy here because all of the lace pieces have to be hand tacked to the first layer of tulle,
Right.
but that's further down the road. We're not
Okay.
cutting the tulle just yet.
All right. So
Okay.
you're not worried. I mean, my lace, maybe I would be worried about what's the pattern going down the center of each piece, so that the
No,
repeats.
you really wouldn't worry about that because the
Really?
seam itself is not going to go directly. You're not going to have a straight seam all the way down. The seam
Right.
itself is going to, you're going to overlap on one side. You may overlap a little to the other. So the motifs kind of read across
Right.
so that you don't really have to worry so much about the pattern matching exactly.
Well, then that's
long- yeah.
that's a relief. That's
Yeah,
one less
because
thing.
as long as the pattern, notice, I wanted the hem laying on the pattern at the hem
Right.
so that, the motifs will sort of read across the body correctly, but they
Right.
don't have to match dead on. That is not the point of this.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Here's the red basting thread. And so I won't take up too much time doing this because it is like watching paint dry. But the reason we cut the seam allowances off is that we want to mark the stitching lines on the lace before we cut. The cutting we'll get to in a little bit. One thing I like to do that I learned from my friend and colleague Susan Calgi is bring the line out and then come up this way so you know where your corner is. Again, you can use any basting thread you choose. I'm choosing red because it shows up better in videos. So now I'm going to peel back the paper. See, you have a little thing like this. You can always tighten it up. So it's fairly straightforward. And so my job is to go off camera and thread baste all of this and bring it back here to show you the results, which is what I'm going to do. we are heading up to the finish line. This is a very, very tedious setup, but you'll be glad you had all this basting in later. It removes any guesswork in the construction. Here. There. Where we began. So again, using a contrasting red thread so you can see what I'm sewing. And now, really. Okay, Joe, you have a question? Just shout it out. Joe, are you there?
Hi, yes, I don't know why my computer suddenly did that. I'm
It's okay,
just sitting
yeah.
here watching. I have no
Sure.
question.
Oh, okay, not to worry. Paper off. And you can see here we have the marks on one of the panels.
And you're not worried about the lace stretching out of shape by removing the pattern so quickly or at this stage?
No, because it's all laying flat.
Thank you.
Mark the others. So we're ready to cut out the back. So this is the back side panel. And what you want to do, you don't cut a straight seam allowance. What you want to do is, let's turn this a little bit this way. You don't want to cut through any motifs if you can help it. It's better to trim them off later. Use these to splice in because we're going to be overlapping these seams as an applique. So whenever possible, as you can see, we're leaving quite a bit here because
On average, what, 2-3 inches?
give yourself a couple 3 inches, yes. And if it's a smaller scale pattern, you could go a little less than that, but 2-3 inches is just a good number. Okay?
Thank you.
All melds together. So like I said, having more rather than less around the perimeters here is going to serve you very well. And on this lace, you've got a lot of thread bars, so you can divide it up that way. You can see here is our stitching line. And here, there are times you can sort of cut through a bit of a motif. To the underarm. As you can see, I was focusing more on cutting than the camera. A bit of an exception for cutting through motifs. Sorry about that.
I think you had your priorities straight.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, I apologize for wearing a tank top, but okay, you know. There we have.
It was probably hot that day.
It was, actually, it was. But yeah, you can see, I see here, there's the underarm. I've given you a little extra up here. But you can see, there's our stitching line. And I've given extra out here. We'll sort all that out later. So now I'm going to come back down to here and separate between these two. Like I said, whenever possible, avoid cutting through motifs, but on something like this, you could sort of cheat it a little. So there. there, here, and there. So this here, you may have to cut through that there.
Hmm.
So this one you left less on the back because you had so much on the sides?
Well, on something like this, because you're going to overlap it, sometimes, yeah, you try to get it up through the center as best you can. But there are times, and see, this is the thing about this, there's no like hard and fast rule on this. But in this case, I understood that, okay, I want to have this to overlap onto the back. But you could have, if you really, really wanted to, I could have taken it this way, but you end up cutting through a larger part of a motif. So what I would say, because see, I've done this before. So, I took that, I took that there because I kind of knew it was going to be okay. If you're not sure and you're in a situation like this, just cut up through the motif and you can make it work.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering because my inclination would have been to put my pieces really far apart.
Well, if this lace is fairly dense, so I kept them a little bit close together. Also, I was really trying to economize on the lace because I didn't want to run out.
Mhm.
So
okay.
if you feel like you've got, if you feel like you've got plenty of lace, then yeah, give it a little more room between the pieces.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is there a rule of thumb as far as going from the front to cover the side piece and then to cover the back, or?
Not really.
Okay.
And so, if you cut it so that you have, plenty of motif on either side.
You can go either way.
Yeah. Because see, later on when you see, because we're not always going to take from one side or the other.
Okay.
Sometimes we're going to take from one side at a certain part of the seam and then take from the other side below it or above it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And line these up here. So you kind of get the point. It's a lot of this is like a three-dimensional puzzle. That's really what we're doing here. So you want to create any kind of thing that you can do to make this interlock later. But wherever possible, avoid cutting through entire motifs. So here, let's see. Cut that one. So I will go off camera and cut this, bring you back my results. So here, as you can see, I have the pieces separated out. Here's the
They
side.
look lovely just cut out.
They do, yeah. This is quite a nice lace. I'm really glad I found it. It was a lot of fun to work with. There is my center back. Here is the other side back. Now I have this little piece here separated out because there are going to be times when you need to patch a hole. So having these little motifs separated out is going to give you a little bit of flexibility when joining all of these together. So what I will do off camera is I will cut the sleeves and bring you back the result. The process is exactly the same. Now, a few comments on laying out the fronts. What you can see, what I've done here, you can see the ruler down here. I've laid the backs, the side backs, so that the patterns match, so I know where the hem is. And so that is then going to be where I know that the hems will be on the front. Now that I have this established, I can take the back pieces away, lay out the front. I'm going to center the front on the center and lay everything out. I'll bring it back. I'll bring the camera back and show you what I've done. Now, as you can see, all of the hem pieces are aligned along the ruler. And I'm giving a little bit of space between these two because we're going to be binding the edges on this. So this is the layout for the front so that the pattern then will read completely horizontally all the way across. Now I will go off camera and thread-based and—
Is it important to also align the front so that it matches vertically as well as horizontally?
On this one, I had to play with, because see, this right here would be the dead center.
Right.
What I found is that if I had everything kind of equidistant from the dead center,
right,
looked a little strange. So what I had to do is go back. I can't remember which one of these I had to play with the placement on so that the pattern looked well.
Okay.
So
Okay.
some of this too is, you get it all basted down and you look at it. And if something looks like, ooh, the flowers sit a little too far one way or the other, you can kind of play with it a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Show you the result when I'm finished. Here are the front pieces, all basted.
Pretty.
And you can see right there and there. These are little arrows. Since the side back panels and the side front panels look quite similar, I put those on the front to make sure that they face towards the center. That way, I won't get confused in construction. Now that the body pieces are cut, yes.
Speaking of confusion,
okay.
How once you pull all of these apart, are you able to tell the front and the back of the materials?
Well, you mean the front and the back of the lace itself?
Yeah.
Well, I showed earlier, when you look at the fabric, there's
oh,
the front.
sorry.
Yeah. And so then, what I like to do just to keep everything together, once I have everything cut, I will put the two fronts together and you have these little arrows there to know that that points to the center front.
Mm-hmm.
I have these I put together and I pin them to the pattern pieces so that you know exactly what you're dealing with in every little bundle.
Okay.
I've taken to writing on tissue paper, front, left, front, center, back, and just pinning it to the piece.
Yeah, because you see, the thing is, and I say it a lot, I mark my patterns as if I were going to be stricken with amnesia at any moment. I recommend that for this as well, because it really is easy to get it confused. So yeah, any kind of marking, any kind of thing that is going to make it so that you will not get confused as you're constructing is fair game.
Okay, yeah, because I look at this and I go, oh, I could easily get confused here.
Well, yeah, and so again, see, I put the arrows on the front. I know that faces the front. I didn't put those arrows on the back. So I would, if I were looking at the two, I would know the back piece is different because it doesn't have an arrow. And same with the sleeves, because you got a two-part sleeve, which I'm going to show you in just a moment here. Okay. Sleeves. Now, this is where we cut the sleeves. What we're seeing right here, this is the front, and what we're looking at is this little motif right here. If you can read across, there is that same motif. And so, let me just come in a little bit here. There it is again, right there. And if you look at the armhole, it's roughly midway between here to here. So really the object here, we're not going to match on the pattern dead on. What we want to have happen is that the motifs read across. So that's what I'm looking for, this little motif right here. And so when I'm going to put a ruler down, and so then that ruler gives me the level. And so then I will cut the two sleeves across like so. So that is my rationale for laying this out. Now you can see this is hugely wasteful of fabric, just accept that. So I will lay out the pattern pieces and baste and bring them back and show you the results. And here we have the two sleeves. I'm gonna pull in a little bit, show you. See those little figures here and here? That tells us that that points to the front. And I've made the same indicators on this side because I get a little bit dyslexic. So I want to know which way is the front. So you can see here, I have basted all of the stitching lines. So now that we have everything marked and basted, we can begin the next step. So here we have all of the pieces cut and bundled. So now that we have everything cut, our next step is going to be backing all of those pieces. So there, that is where we're going to stop today, because I think you've got plenty of work to get to that point. So questions?
So I have a brief fitting question, and that is, I did a muslin for the Princess Susan Kelji jacket.
Okay.
Can I adjust it since I got that to fit around my bust? Can I use that as a starting point for this?
If you have a pattern that you like, the principles are going to be the same. It may look a little different in construction because you're working with a different pattern, but if you have a pattern that you love the fit on that you can use on this, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm not thinking I'd use that pattern, but I'm thinking maybe I could use the adjustments I made to the princess line and just carry them over here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, so other questions?
Is there a list of sizes somewhere? Because I don't seem to have anything to go by.
You mean yeah, I could get that for you. I should have.
Thank you.
But yeah.
I don't think I've had that.
Yeah, because what you can do is you can take the measurement across the pieces, and that'll give you a rough measurement of what what the bust level is right at the underarm, parallel to the waist is like a good kind of, you can measure the pattern to see how that compares to your figure. But let me get that. I need to email her anyway for some other things, so I can ask her for the sizing on that.
Oh, she did include a file in the PDF sheet if you bought the PDF version.
Did you?
Yeah,
get
there's a.
Oh, I did buy the PDF version.
Okay,
yes. Oh, it may be that because I had it printed out by somebody. I've got it on tissue now, printed out, but they may not have bothered printing out anything else. So I'll have a look back to that email.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay. So good. That's good to know.
Thank you.
So other questions?
Oh, sorry. One more from me. I bought my lace. Here it is.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But I bought 2 meters, which is 6 feet. And I then looked at your thing, because I do everything the wrong way around, and realized I should have bought 9 feet, 3 yards. You know what I'm going to ask. Any chance of me getting this out of 2 meters, or should I go buy
what I would say is get the other meter. I know it may be painful to order it, but you might want that for the sleeves.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, because otherwise you might end up with a lace vest.
Okay. Okay. Not attractive. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So other questions?
How much do you want us to get accomplished this week?
Well, ideally, what I would like to do is I would like for everyone, and you can email me to set up the office hour. I would like you to be, I would, because see, you can work at your own pace. That's the beauty of this particular thing. So, if you don't get, if you're not like right there every week, I'm not going to jump up and down and have a fit. I would like to really start getting everyone's muslins fitted so that, then we can go from there. So if you get your muslins fitted, I'm all happy. If you have your muslin fitted and ready and you're ready to mark and cut out, all good. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so other questions?
Sorry, one more from me.
Go ahead.
About the monofilament, I
Yeah.
was just looking up on Amazon, etc. Because obviously my lace is navy,
Mhm.
but I couldn't find any that was navy. It just
No,
says
okay,
invisible thread. So
Well, okay, monofilament, that's a good question. Monofilament comes in clear and it also comes in smoke.
okay,
So you would want the smoke because the smoke disappears on darker colors. So you don't have to have a monofilament that matches exactly. That is one of the beauties of monofilament, but the smoke will not show up on darker colors.
okay, fine, thank you.
Okay,
Which size monofilament should we use? I'm seeing
the
there's different
finest you
sizes.
can get. The
As fine as we
finest.
can get. Okay.
Yes, yeah, because it just, it is kind of amazing how it disappears. Now, another little, this is very way off topic, but it appeals to the nerd in me. Another use for monofilament, a friend of mine years ago had a chenille sweater that her mother had knitted her, and it was coming, unraveled, and she was kind of distressed because, she loved the sweater, and she figured, okay, whatever fix is going to look like a fix, but, she didn't want it to keep going. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a try. And I put the monofilament in the needle and a matching color in the bobbin, and I darned over it with free motion, and the monofilament just disappeared, and you couldn't see the repair.
I bet
So-
she was happy.
Thrilled. Yes, she was. She was very happy, and yeah. So it's just because some people turn their nose up at things like that, but hey, monofilament, it has its uses. It's good to know when to use it and when not to. So other questions?
I have an off-topic question.
Yes.
Would we be able to plan ahead to if we wanted it to be able to close, the jacket to close?
Well, this meets in the center front. So if you want,
Yeah.
because what I would say is, hooks and loops on the front would be pretty for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Any
Can
other?
I just ask how would you style this? What would you wear under it?
Well, I've seen it, like a little camisole, pair of beautiful drapey silk velvet palazzo trousers for evening. You could put it with a little strapless like bustier. It could be a strapless dress, or it could be like a little strapless with a big ball gown skirt. If you really wanted to, you could just wear it with jeans and a kicky tank top.
Right, but a close fitting top, right?
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Well, then I think our work is done for today. So I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes, but if you have other things you need to do, I won't take offense if you were to go on with your day.
I do have a fabric
you very
question,
much.
Kenneth.
Okay, what's the fabric question?
I may be getting ahead of myself, but for the Dupioni for the binding,
Yes.
I know that you got yours block fused. Mine is not block fused, at least right now, and it is very shreddy. So should I bite the bullet and fuse it, or should I just?
I would
expect
bite
that
the
it's
bullet and fuse it.
Okay.
Really, I would prefer not to fuse it.
Why?
I want the drapiness of it.
For
for a binding,
a bias
though.
binding, there's not a lot of drape, really.
So should I just use like a light, like a knit interfacing, or?
Yeah, if you use like just a fusible tricot or fusible weft, something really lightweight to keep it from shredding as you're working, that is going to make your life
That
much
will
easier.
save my sanity.
And
Okay.
Catherine, if you don't want to fuse it, you don't have to. You can not fuse the Dupioni if you don't want to, but I've just found that working with that particular fabric, making bindings, having that little bit of fusible just keeps all of that bias from shredding before you get it onto your garment.
Yeah, because I mean, at least mine, and it's a beautiful color, but just sitting here on my table, it's throwing threads. Like I've had to, and I'm like, oh no, this is not stable.
Yeah, mine's not throwing threads, so I.
Yours
well,
might
you
be
know,
tighter woven than mine.
Yeah,
Mine's
and
got
so,
this
you know,
kind of-
honestly,
yeah.
see, understand that all of this, none of this is carved in stone. If there are certain ways that you know to do certain things better, all good. I won't jump up and down if you don't do it the way I think you should. I'm just saying that, from my experience with these kinds of fabrics, I think it works better this way. But if you can make it work the other way, absolutely.
Yeah, so like my individual threads are pretty thick on this guy, and that's why I think it's shredding itself.
Yeah, mine's pretty thick too, so but yeah, it's not thread.
Again, what I would say is make a little sample, make a little test. Try it with no fusing, try it with fusing, and see which one you like better.
I thought that the tricot, putting the interfacing on it is better so that you don't get the bumps from when you go over the lace, right? It makes it smoother.
That's a good
out. And this particular
thought.
binding,
Right, because then, yeah, I know, but the binding is going over lace and then not over lace.
Right. So the fusible also in this particular binding, what you're doing, kind of running ahead a little bit, you're cutting the bias strip, you're folding it in half and pressing it, and you're sewing both raw edges. So you have two thicknesses of seam allowance that everything comes over.
But that's going over the organza, so it's not going to be as bumpy on the lace.
A little bit, yeah. So it's, you saw the lace jacket itself. It turned out okay without any bumps. So because again, further down the road, I'm going to show you how I like to stay the edges of the lace with some organza. And that also, Vicki, is going to kind of smooth out the bumps in the guipure.
Right, but you have to see how thick your do peony is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted a heavier one, but unfortunately the one that I liked was very thin. And I was like, why is the best color the worst one?
Well, but you see, that's why we have fusible interface. Okay, so yes.
Oh, I have two types of basting thread from Susan, of course. One is the Japanese and one is the silk. Should I use the silk?
I use the Japanese. Use the Japanese.
You would? Okay.
It's going to stay better in the lace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, not slipping.
Yeah, the silk is really for things, like if you're working on, say, a gabardine and you're worried about leaving thread marks when you press, silk is for that. But the other, her other Japanese basting thread will be completely wonderful for this.
Okay, that's what I'll use.
Okay. So, other questions? Okay, then. I think we're finished. So I will. Oh yes, go ahead, Vicki.
No, bye.
Oh, bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Kenneth.
So I will see you all next week. I'll download this. We'll probably get the links either tonight or tomorrow sometime.
All right, great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.